had a group of 20 CEOs together earlier today as part of a workshop, and you look around and just the statistics would say that among that group, wow, 8 of you are probably be considered failing when we get to that 3-year mark. Our hope, the CEO role, for as hard as it is, it's commensurately high impact in the world. About 70 million people who report to the CEOs. If you look at the 200 people we identified, we did the math on it, and they create, during their tenure, they created $5 trillion more of value than their peers. 5 trillion more, that's the GDP of Japan. And that's the third largest economy. So you think about just contribution to economies, contribution to GDP societies. It's an important role. And then you add to that all of the social, all of the environmental aspects that actually are under the remit of these large companies.
I think a huge part of the CEO role now is external, right? So the days of just setting your strategy and running your organization and delivering for shareholders, that's only half the job, right? The demands being placed on CEOs to both manage external stakeholders and be thoughtful about their expectations of the company, whether it's regulators, investors, customers, the public at large, that is part of the CEO role, to think that through. And if you think about the last 2 years and the pandemic and all of the external shocks happening there, ultimately it's the CEO who is the integrator who has to think about how to navigate those moments, right? So how do you help the person in those shoes who are looking across all of the trends internally, seeing what's happening in the world, think ahead both of, there's this phrase, having a microscope and a telescope, right? They need to manage the day-to-day and be thinking ahead. And I think it's the CEO role even that's more important now than ever, right? As we navigate all these twists and turns. That's what makes it such a challenging role.
If you're going to move this needle on being an excellent CEO, I think the one thing you would take away, right, is regardless of context, regardless of circumstance, regardless of industry, all of that, there is an aspect around great CEOs are bold. Great CEOs are bold. And you can be bold regardless of context, right? Or you can be bold within that context, right? You asked the question around, can this help make CEOs more successful? I would argue that if they're not bold in that first year, they're not going to move the needle. That is the crux that will actually let you conquer any context and let you conquer any situation around failing, right? That is your one safeguard against failure in many ways.
A CEO in any given context, they're handed an endowment from the previous CEO. There's a certain amount of R&D that's happened. There's a certain talent base that's there. There's a certain debt leverage that's there. So there's, you're kind of saddled with some stuff when you take it over. There's also trends in an industry or macroeconomic trends, which you may or may not, but probably don't have a ton of control over, depending on your company. And those do account for 55% of what drives a company's performance. So if you pick a good industry to be a CEO in that's growing, you're naturally going to do better. What is interesting, though, is 45% is under a CEO's control. And what we found with these CEOs who are truly excellent, they think about that 55% differently than most. They don't really think a lot of that is out of their control, especially in this realm of boldness. So part of, one of the big things we learned is CEOs really thoughtfully migrate their portfolio into high growth businesses. So just because you've come into an industry that's low growth and has certain trends, first of all, how do I become an exceptional futurist and ride these trends like a surfboard rather than let them be waves that wash over me and drown me? Secondly, how do I think about there's a better beach to surf on? And how do I make my way towards that beach over time? So we saw chemicals companies become life sciences companies. We saw kind of old energy companies become clean energy companies. We saw, Ajay Banga gave us a great example where it was like, we thought of ourselves as a payments company. And until we said, wait a second, only 20% of all transactions happen electronically. Let's kill cash. It all of a sudden is a completely broader playing field that you're thinking about. So I do think they think of trends and they think of endowment, so to speak, as not just what I'm given, but how do I turn those into opportunity? And that's where the bold mindset comes in. If you have a bold mindset, you think about, might be a little bit of a risk, but I'm not risking the company, and I can actually go and test and learn and really drive something meaningful here. So.